The suburb of Cabramatta in Sydney's southwest, Australia's largest Indo-Chinese enclave, home to thousands of migrants who've made this place the multicultural melting pot that it is today. For decades, Cabramatta and the greater Fairfield city area have been settled by hard-working market gardeners from southern Europe as part of the massive post-war immigration. One of Cabramatta's favourite sons is former boxing champion Rocky Gattalari, who thrills crowds by fighting with his heart on his sleeve. Who'll forget his brave battle with the then rising star of Australian boxing, Lionel Rose, in 1967. The Australian bantamweight title fight lasted 13 brutal rounds. While Rocky battles it out in the ring, another more brutal conflict is taking place, the Vietnam War. At the end of that conflict, thousands of Vietnamese refugees flock to our shores, and many establish themselves here in Cabramatta. And like other migrant communities, they bring with them a wonderful new culture. But with the 80s, there's a burgeoning crime problem, with Asian gangs turning the area into a haven for drugs, violence and corruption. Standing rock solid against these gangs is a local member of parliament whose brave and confrontational stance will lead to an unspeakable crime. Australia's first political assassination. For more than 15 years, the controversial war between communist North Vietnam and the United States-backed South Vietnam rages, with tens of thousands of American and Australian troops fighting on the side of South Vietnam. In 1975, American and Australian troops pull out as the communists overrun South Vietnam. Hordes of refugees are forced to flee their homeland. Men, women and children spending weeks aboard leaky boats, with many dying, trying to reach the freedom of our shores. One of those many thousands looking for economic and political freedom in the 1980s is this man, Phuong Ngo, whose grit and determination eventually pays dividends. It has taken 13 escape attempts from the Vietnamese communists, and he finally makes it by boat to Malaysia. From there, he's granted refugee status, settling in Cabramatta. Phuong Ngo is highly intelligent, well-educated, and from a once well-to-do family, but he arrives in Australia penniless. These days, Cabramatta is a thriving suburb dotted with Asian shops and restaurants that attract visitors from all walks of life. In fact, in many ways, this could be mistaken for the streets of Saigon. It's an authentic Asian experience. You can walk here in almost complete safety, but it hasn't always been like this. By the 1990s, Vietnamese crime gangs are running riot.
5 men wearing samurai headbands and armed with guns burst into the home at 5.
In the early 90s, Gary Raymond is an inspector of police stationed at Cabramatta.
We got overdoses on the hour, every hour, deaths. There was a number of shootings and murders there. They were using meat cleavers from restaurants and knives from restaurants to have knife fights. There was, the train would pull up and there was a whole raft of people get off the train, get the heroin. And it was just, the resources weren't coming in there, and commander after commander tried to get the resources.
Ken Chapman is a long-time resident and political activist.
In the late 80s, the drug problem within Cabramatta was, shall we say, mainly drugs, a little bit of shootings and stabbings, etc. But it seemed to become a more organised concept in the early 90s. We believed it was actually because of Phuong Ngo coming onto the scene.
The public is angry and demanding politicians and police do more. One of those campaigning hardest is John Newman. A tough-talking, hard-working, no-nonsense local politician, determined that these Vietnamese gangs be crushed at all costs.
The Asian gangs involved don't fear our laws, but there's one thing that they do fear, and that's possible deportation back to the jungles of Vietnam, because that's where, frankly, they belong.
To understand what drives this man, you first have to understand his background. Newman comes from an immigrant Yugoslav family. He's officially anglicised his surname from Normenko. He suffered an enormous personal tragedy some years earlier when his pregnant wife and young son are killed in a car accident. He has become a driven and single-minded man.
Newman finally finds some happiness when he becomes engaged to his electoral office secretary, Chinese interpreter Lucy Wang. Newman has been politically active since the 1970s, becoming a member of the Australian Labor Party, deputy mayor of the local Fairfield Council, and by 1994 has represented the seat of Cabramatta in the New South Wales State Parliament for 8 years.
But what he used to do is, confront dealers, confront, drug users, and literally tell them to get to rehab or get out of Cabramatta. He made a lot of enemies. There's a lot of people really wanted to get rid of him from not only the, the political scene, but the drug scene itself, because he was an obstruction, and he did cause things to happen to either displace some of the dealers or certainly make it very uncomfortable. And he was threatened many times.
One of his enemies is none other than Vietnamese immigrant Phung Ngo. By 1994, he has become a Fairfield councillor, has built up wealth, power and influence within the Cabramatta community, and is determined to go even further. His quick transformation from poor immigrant to wealthy mover and shaker is a source of pride to Ngo, but wonderment to others. The late Shirley Barrett at the time is a fellow Fairfield councillor and one-time supporter who knew Phung Ngo well.
And it just seemed strange at the time, and it still does seem strange, from arriving as a penniless refugee to now being known as a millionaire. Well, Phung's political ambition and aspirations is eventually to become a senator. But at the time, I think that the first step was to get through to the state seat.
The state seat that Phung Ngo covets is the seat of Cabramatta, held by rival John Newman. Newman is well established and has a strong supporter base, and he's become the major obstacle to Phung Ngo's political ambitions. He's already lobbied to ensure that Phung Ngo never becomes the mayor of Fairfield.
John was very active in relation to try to counter the Phung Ngo influence within Cabramatta. We've seen him nothing more than as a crook. So they tried to level the same charges as John, but John was out there all the time fighting the crime and trying to get police action. He'd have the cameras up every week. If something's gone wrong in Cabramatta, whether it be an extortion, a murder, a knifing or a home invasion, and those things were becoming more prevalent then. And we just had a funny feeling in the back of our mind that Phung was behind most of it.
For both Newman and Ngo, the animosity has now become far more than political. It's become personal, very personal, and each is determined to win the battle that will strike at the very heart of Australia's democracy.
Vietnamese refugee Phung Ngo and local state member of Parliament John Newman are bitter rivals. When Ngo stands as an independent candidate against John Newman in the 1991 state elections, Newman trounces him. So, determined to beat Newman once and for all, Phung Ngo joins the Australian Labor Party in 1993, sets up a new branch of the party and recruits local members.
What Cabramatta needs is a strong sense of leadership. a person who can unite the community and work for the rebuilding of a better Cabramatta.
Are you going to vote for me?
Yes.
Yes? Yes? Thank you. Thank you very much.
In 1993, then Governor-General Bill Hayden officially opens the Mekong Club, a licensed premises for the Indo-Chinese community of Cabramatta. No is its honorary president, and the Mekong Club becomes his castle. No graces his friends with jobs at the club and himself with largesse. With about 100 poker machines, the Mekong Club has become not just a centre of entertainment, but a money machine and a place for 5T gangsters to meet and plot. This gang of Vietnamese criminals is involved in drug dealing, extortion, home invasions, and even worse, murder.
He established his own political party within the Mekong Club. Phung Ngo used the Mekong Club as his headquarters. That was his club, shall we say. He was never a director on the board, but yet he's got all the money and ran the club from another office in John Street, not from the club itself.
Newman succeeds in forcing an official inquiry into Phung Ngo's activities involving the Mekong Club. The authorities do find irregularities and ban Ngo from holding any position on any licensed club. Newman has won another round against his archenemy. It's around this time that Newman receives a series of threats. There are break-ins at Newman's electoral office, his car is vandalised, and he begins receiving telephone calls like this at his home and in the office.
You're dead, Newman. What can I do? You're dead, Newman.
Yeah, John had a number of threats that he reported to us, but didn't stop him. This bloke was courageous. This fellow was put politics aside, and he was an advocate for his area. He was, no one worried him. There was not a person on earth he was frightened of. It really wasn't. And so I guess that made him a target, whereas, you know, some politicians who were lesser assertive were sort of tolerated and in fact didn't interrupt the whole thing.
John Newman has become a major headache, not only for the criminals of Cabramatta, but also for Phung Ngo. It's a disagreement over what many might consider a minor matter, symbolised by this ornate oriental gateway that brings the two men to boiling point.
Phung wanted a sister city arrangement made with Taiwan very early in the piece. And we thought the most appropriate way was to have a sister city with the mainland Chinese. After all, they were the majority within the Cabramatta electorate at that time. And so Phung was dead against this. He had his cohorts all supporting him with this Taiwanese thing. At the end of the day, I think the whole lot has to come down to money. We believe that Phung was able to gain a hell of a lot of money for various projects from Taiwan. Taiwan wanted its own little identity within Sydney. Cabramatta was ideal.
The majority of fellow Fairfield councillors agree with Phung Ngo. But as far as Ngo is concerned, John Newman will continue to hinder his lofty political ambitions. Super confident about his standing within the Vietnamese community and his influence within the Labor Party and state government circles, he considers himself untouchable.
There was talk at the time that Phung was going to help the Labor Party raise enough money to get out of some of their consolidated debts that they had at the time, and also help raise money for the party itself.
Overflowing with jealousy and greed and desperate for power and influence, Phung Ngo decides he must be more forceful in addressing the problem John Newman poses. He's now determined that Newman has to go, and extraordinary as it might sound, Phung Ngo has no qualms about approaching several employees at the Mekong Club, offering them thousands of dollars to assassinate his political opponent.
Around mid-1994, there are several aborted assassination attempts. Two because the would-be killers get cold feet when they discover who the high-profile target is. In another attempt, The killers wait outside Newman's home ready to strike. When Newman doesn't arrive home by midnight, they decide to pull up stakes and try again later. On Saturday, September 3rd, 1994, Fung No insists that the hit will take place in a couple of days. And that night, the assassins do a dry run and drive past the Newman home. Fung No follows in his own car and shadows their every move. John Newman's days are numbered. On the night of September 5th, 1994, John Newman returns to his Cabramatta home after attending a political meeting at the Cabra Vale Diggers. The following morning, Australians will wake to the news that a Member of Parliament, John Newman, has been assassinated. John Newman's execution on the night of September 5th, 1994 is the culmination of a bitter power struggle between the Cabramatta Member of Parliament and Fung No, the former Vietnamese refugee and current Fairfield councillor. Newman's neighbour, Derek Murphin, is at home on that Monday night and hears the gunshots.
I walked straight to the front door and opened it, and immediately heard a woman screaming.
Murphin looks outside and then calls 000.
My words to the operator were, my neighbour, Mr. John Newman, MP, has been shot. There's a woman screaming. I could see a car moving slowly. It appears to be a dark blue or green XD Ford Falcon.
Get here as quick as you can.
Murphin rushes to the scene just 50 metres away and finds Newman slumped near his front door.
I was with him for about 30 seconds and he stopped breathing. I'd evaluated him. His skin was cold and clammy, his lips were blue, his fingers were going cold, his face was cold.
John, can you hear me?
He had blood in the bottom of his mouth and a smear of blood in his teeth. And the first thing I noticed when I knelt down beside him was a hole in the left armpit. I looked further. Hole in the right one, the arm, and I thought he'd got one straight through, top of the chest.
As Murphin works desperately on the mortally wounded Newman, Lucy Wang is inside on her knees, screaming hysterically at the 000 operator.
By now, other neighbours are in the street, completely stunned and shocked by what they're witnessing. First response police are quickly on the scene and they too are shocked. A sitting Member of Parliament has been shot dead. Inspector Gary Raymond is called out.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
And I saw two young police officers had already arrived, and John's body was on his back and the two police officers were resuscitating him. Looked over and I saw Lucy. She was on the front steps of the house just crying and screaming hysterically, and I looked around and saw some spent cartridges in the vicinity of the driveway, and the colour just drained from her face. I thought, where's the shooter?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Come on.
And I mean, many things run through your mind. Is the shooter in the house? Is it someone that's there at the scene? Was it a drive-by? Is it a neighbour? And so with that, I just quickly went down, recognised it was John, and I immediately knew, politician, sadly shot, this is going to be huge.
1, 2, 3.
I glanced down and I saw a wound, probably an exit wound from his chest, and it was what we call a sucking chest wound, and there was froth and blood coming out of it, sadly, and as the police officers resuscitated him, because of my ambulance and rescue squad experience in the past, I knew that the projectile had probably gone through his heart or through his thoracic aorta or something like that.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
After arriving home from a party meeting at around 9:30, witnesses say an unlit car cruised up to the house, then a series of shots were fired, 2 hitting Mr Newman in the chest.
Front veranda, they attempted to give him the cardio.
Police believe the killers may have followed Mr Newman home.
Police must now break the terrible news to John Newman's family.
When the police knocked on my door, I thought, no, it couldn't be. And he said, we're working on him. And when my son said, no, Mum, he's gone. I don't know. I just broke down. Because that news was the worstest in my life.
John Newman's confidant, Ken Chapman, has been at the political meeting with Newman earlier that night. He receives the news and rushes to the crime scene.
I spoke to police in my statement that evening, and they asked me who I thought would be capable or wanting to kill John Newman. I only had one person in mind. That was Fung No.
Within hours of the execution, the multi-agency task force GAP is established. As crime scene investigators canvass the area for clues, detectives begin interviewing John Newman's fiancée, Lucy Wang. It's her information that provides police with a clear picture of how he was killed.
The first shot hit him and spun him round about 180 degrees, and then the second shot hit him also, so there was 2 wounds to the chest area which were fatal. And the other 2 shots, one hit the car and one hit the roof of the carport. Fortunately, Lucy Wang, who was standing at the front of the motor vehicle, was not injured. We established from Lucy Wang that she observed this murder. A single gunman who appeared to be a young person of Asian appearance, very thin build, wearing an army jacket, stood at the entrance to the carport and fired 4 shots from a what we believe to be a .32 automatic pistol. She then saw the gunman race to a green-coloured Falcon and get into the passenger's door, and the vehicle sped off. The whole murder sequence happened just in a matter of minutes, and John Newman was dead.
Several witnesses tell detectives they'd seen 2 cars in the area before the shooting, and then both cars speed off. They tell police of a green car, which they believe carried the shooter and a getaway driver, and a white Toyota Camry. From the early evidence, investigators are certain this is a contract killing. But who did it, and what is the motive?
Newman's family and friends name the ambitious Fung No as someone with a very strong motive to kill him. But police are also aware that others, including members of the notorious 5T gang, also have a motive to rid themselves of the crime crusader.
2 days later, Fung No and fellow Fairfield councillors fly to Taiwan on a sister city mission. Police have not yet interviewed No. The late Shirley Barrett, a one-time Fung No supporter, is shocked at No's attitude.
Well, it just troubled me that people who were supposedly members of the same political party could be virtually pleased to know that the state member had actually been murdered, assassinated, or whatever you'd like to refer to it as. And I just think that it was in terribly bad taste that people would be laughing about such a thing.
Who was laughing? Who was making these comments?
Fung No.
When the delegation returns from Taiwan a week later, police meet Fung No at the airport and ask him to accompany them to their office at Cabramatta police station to answer some questions. No readily agrees, but when they arrive, the media is there in force and the prime suspect holds an impromptu press conference.
Do you have any clue who killed Mr. Newman?
It's not up to me to make speculation, and if I know that, I would talk to the police.
One of Fung No's interrogators is Detective Wayne Walpole.
The first few days of the task force GAP being set up, we'd received a wealth of information in relation to conflicts between John Newman and Fung No.
During the interrogation, No gives some detailed answers regarding his movements. He claims to have been at the Mekong Club with friends before driving home and calling several colleagues on the car phone.
On the way home now.
No's colleagues and cohorts confirm the phone calls. His cronies here at the Mekong Club also confirm his alibi that he was at the club at the time of the murder, but they say little else. Detectives have come up against that traditional wall of silence, but despite this, some information trickles through.
There was an attempt or a dry run, you might say, the Saturday night before. Information came to the task force that that Fung No was identified actually in a street behind Newman's house late at night at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. And his car was identified. He was identified standing outside his car. So, and that was pretty significant because during the first interview, we'd locked Fung No into the fact that he'd never been anywhere near John Newman's house. Had no reason to go there.
Detective Ian McNabb has retrieved the spent cartridges from the crime scene and has them examined.
Initially, our ballistics expert, Detective Sergeant Graham North, he identified the shell casings that were used at the shooting. Now, these are unusual shell casings because they had a flat firing pin. Graham had not seen that before in Australia, and he made some inquiries overseas. It turned out that Beretta made a 32 calibre pistol in 1934 and 1935 for the Italian Army, and that weapon actually had a flat firing pin.
In the first few months, detectives interview hundreds of people. But other than speculation and a strong gut feeling, there's little evidence to tie Fung No or anyone else to the murder. It's time to talk to the main suspect again.
In the first interview, he locked down the point that you know, he was at the Mekong Club at a certain time for a staff meeting, and then he went across to his newspaper office, and then back to the Mekong Club. And he was very specific as to where he parked his car and had left his car keys, or if he had his car keys on him. And of course, during the second interview, when we started painting him into a corner, he was trying to backtrack from a lot of the answers he'd given, realising that certainly his car was going to play a bit of a part in his downfall.
Dear friends, we're here to mourn a good Australian and to honour a brave man.
On September 5th, 1994, State Member of Parliament John Newman is shot dead by an assassin in front of his fiancée, Lucy Wang, outside their Cabramatta home. The investigation is long and hard. The months turn into years, but the doggedness of investigators starts to pay off after 3 years as previously reluctant witnesses begin coming forward. One giving detectives vital information about how Fung No had approached him and others to obtain firearms and carry out a hit. This witness is granted immunity from prosecution and witness protection in return for his evidence against Fung No. The witnesses also name others who've allegedly been part of the assassination plot. Police are told of the earlier aborted attempts on Newman's life, and that late on the night of the murder, Fung No approached someone at the Mekong Club and whispered, "I did it."
Yeah, I did it.
It took a while because it was very hard to break through the the culture and the fear factor in Cabramatta at that time.
Speculation is rife as one Sydney newspaper runs a story suggesting Fung No is connected with the deadly 5T gang leader Tri Minh Tran. Tri has been killed in gang-related violence, and the story appears after No attends his funeral. The story also suggests that No had once offered Tri $10,000 to kill John Newman, but Tri declined. Naturally, Fung No denies this.
Did you ever offer Tri Minh Tran money?
No.
To kill John Newman?
Not for whatever purposes. Tri Minh Tran never asked me for any money, and I have never offered Tri Minh Tran any money for whatever purposes at all.
As the investigation drags on, those close to John Newman are becoming anxious.
The pain is there always, you know. For the 3 years, the pain can never go away. It's very frustrating that there's nothing that's been done yet.
But Lucy, who's now living in China, doesn't know that the net is gradually closing in on her fiancé's killer. And by February 1st, 1998, 3.5 years after the murder, police decide to take their evidence to the coroner, an inquest that'll last 6 weeks. Police present evidence and testimony that casts an enormous cloud over the alibis of Fung No and his suspected co-conspirators and Mekong Club employees. The witness alleges Fung No is the mastermind. Chu Quang Dao, who owns a green Ford Fairlane, is the getaway driver, and a Mekong Club employee, whose name has been suppressed, is a third accomplice. Detectives tell the coroner that after raiding the employee's home, they had found an army-style jacket, which later tested positive to gunpowder residue. A telecom expert tells the coroner that with the newest technology, he could now more accurately pinpoint Fung No's mobile phone activity at the times in question, and it was not where he had stated. The suspects refused to take the witness stand. Within hours of the inquest ending, detectives finally charge Fung No and 2 others. A magistrate grants Fung No bail, but keeps the other 2 in custody. The case is strengthening, and advances in telecom technology since John Newman's death in 1994 produce new evidence that arouses the interest of investigators. It'll be this new technology that gives them a vital lead to an assassin. No continues to deny having anything to do with the Newman killing, as do his co-accused. No is still confident he'll beat the charges, but he has not counted on the latest mobile telephone technology, which will expose his string of lies.
I established that there were 3 main phones used at the Mekong Club. One was a fixed phone in Fung No's car, which was a white Toyota Camry. That was a fixed mobile phone. There were 2 other ones that were available to the club. One was normally utilised by the operations manager of the club, and the other one was Fung's personal phone. From that, we made some inquiries as to the usage of those phones and established that there'd been a flurry of activity on not only the Monday night, but the Saturday night in the local area. From that, we looked at telecom experts and the towers that were used, the towers that the mobile phones connected to. From there, we could basically establish the direction where within a 5K radius of where some of these phones were, and we utilised that as part of the investigation. What we established was, particularly with Fung No, was that he had stated when he was interviewed that he was on his way home to his house at Bonnyrigg. We also established that during that time he had 2 phone calls with Shirley Barrett, and there was another phone call to one of the other Mekong Club phones.
Hello, Shirley. It's Fong here. How are you?
Shirley Barrett advised us that Fung had told her he was on his way home.
How did you go?
However, the phones didn't really establish that. It actually showed that the phones were going in an opposite direction to the Bonnyrigg. more than likely down Cumberland Highway through Liverpool, and a final call was connected through a cell tower in Hammondville.
Even though he now faces a murder charge, Fung No still goes about his daily business, chasing his political ambitions as though nothing has happened.
He'd walk down the street after the murder with the new member for Cabramatta, Reba Ma, and also one of the mayors, Nick Lalich, you know, to try and make him look, I'm a great guy, look at me. But powerful friends.
Fung No's supreme arrogance is only matched by the investigators' determination to find more evidence against him and his accomplices. While he continues his denials, confident that he'll beat the charges, detectives are studying telecom records dating back almost 4 years.
We'd made maps in relation to the movements of the phones. From that, we worked out a possibility that the reason why Fung was travelling that way was maybe to dispose of the murder weapon. He was trying to create an alibi with Shirley Barrett. He was talking to her, there was an upcoming trip to Taiwan, and he was talking to her about that trip to Taiwan. Fortunately for us, I suppose the phone dropped out and the phone call had to be recommenced, so that gave us 2 calls. As I said earlier, there was another call as well. By those calls, we could actually trace the direction the phone was going. We could put it in a particular area for a cell tower. Therefore, myself and another officer did a canvass of the area and of where the phone directions were. Out of that, we established maybe 2 locations of bridges where perhaps the weapon could have been thrown from.
Detectives speculate that Fung No might have thrown the murder weapon into the murky waters from the bridge that this bridge replaced. Divers begin searching, and after 2 days' success, they find a rusty, barnacle-encrusted 1934 Beretta pistol that's been lying down there for more than 3 years. Australian ballistics experts are unable to positively identify the gun as the one used to shoot John Newman. And so Detective Greg Newbury takes the firearm on a quick trip for testing by a German ballistics expert.
He used twin scanning electron microscopes. As such, he could examine with an electron microscope 2 of the ballistics evidence, being the firearm, the cartridge cases, and the projectiles, at the same time at a very minute detail, which eventually allowed him to make the conclusion that more probably than not, that firearm was the firearm that was used to kill John Newman.
It's this new and important piece of evidence, the likely murder weapon, that now has detectives and prosecutors far more confident about the upcoming trial.
Oh, well, you're the same. Trying to get more uniforms.
It's been more than 3 years since the brazen assassination of local Cabramatta Member of Parliament John Newman. His bitter political and personal rival, Fairfield councillor and one-time Vietnamese refugee Fung No and 2 others have finally been charged with the murder, thanks to a rollover witness, mobile telephone records and a rusty pistol.
Is he breathing in a pulse?
In July 1999, Fung No, Chu Quang Dao and another man stand trial for the Newman murder. But just 2 weeks into it, the judge aborts the trial because of a technicality. A second trial begins in February 2000, and prosecutors have extra ammunition for their case against Fung No. They have a second rollover witness and a self-confessed accomplice. The man, who has now become a protected witness, also tells of 3 previously bungled and amateurish attempts on Newman's life.
There was one at a car park behind a restaurant in Cabramatta, where John Newman had been present at a dinner at which some presentations were to be made to citizens of the area, and they were waiting near the car park where his car was parked for him. The second one was at his home. They were lurking in the shadows of the bushes of his garden when he came home from a function one evening, and drove up, parked his car in the driveway. By the time they came out of the bushes, he'd already gone inside. And the third one was at a dance at a local community hall where John Newman was seen dancing, I think, with his then fiancée Lucy, and the plan was that they were going to attack him at the dance, but they realised there were too many people there and it would have been hard for them to escape.
The witness is also able to corroborate another witness account of exactly what happened on the night of the murder. He also names the person he claims to have been the shooter. And as a result, a local Vietnamese man, David Dinh, becomes the third person to be charged with John Newman's murder.
The second trial begins on schedule and runs for 3 months. But only Phung Ngo and the alleged driver, Chu Quang Dao, face this trial. David Dinh has been ordered to face a separate trial. Mark Tedeschi recalls the Crown case.
There were 2 alleged co-offenders who gave evidence for the prosecution about the earlier attempts, about the involvement of Phung Ngo, about how guns had been provided for this enterprise. Then there was evidence about the finding of a gun in the Georges River at Voyager Point.
But the gun has completely rusted through, except for the firing pin. That pin has been placed in another gun, similar to the one taken from the Georges River. The gun is fired, and the spent shells are compared to those found outside John Newman's home. The expert was able to say that the markings show it's highly likely that it was the gun used to kill John Newman. And Mark Tedeschi presents more evidence.
Then there was some mobile phone evidence from which we were able to trace the movements of Phung Ngo immediately after the shooting of John Newman.
Hi, Shirley. It's Phung here. How are you?
And it showed him proceeding in a direction which was towards Voyager Point when the gun had been found.
Oh, fantastic. Yes.
The prosecutor also presents the evidence from witnesses who have seen Phung Ngo in a street at the rear of Newman's house and a green car at the front, just 2 days before the murder. It's suggested that they've been carrying out surveillance. After a lengthy trial, the jury retires to consider its verdict. But after 6 days, it returns, unable to reach a unanimous decision. A single juror has held out, and the trial is aborted for a second time. A third trial begins before Justice John Dunford at the Central Criminal Court on March 12, 2001, now almost 7 years since the murder. And this time, all 3 men appear together.
It's June 28th, 2001, when the jury returns to the packed courtroom. The 3 accused stand as the jury delivers its verdict. The verdicts against the first 2 accused, David Dinh and Chu Quang Dao, are declared, and they're found not guilty. Then it's Phung Ngo's turn, and when the jury foreman declares him guilty, Phung Ngo sinks into his seat and crosses himself.
The case against Dao and Dinh has been much weaker than that against Phung Ngo, and the jury takes note of inconsistencies of various statements made by the protected witnesses regarding the pair. Outside the court, there are mixed reactions. David Dinh and Chu Quang Dao are naturally greatly relieved at their not guilty verdicts. For John Newman's family, it's a case of bittersweet.
All I can say is Phung Ngo wanted the upper house, now he's got the upper bunk. I hope he enjoys it.
For fiancée Lucy Wang, now living in China, the news is some relief.
I've lost a man I loved, and a lot of happiness I may share with John.
The mastermind of the Newman assassination is sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole. He has lost all appeals and now will spend the rest of his life behind bars. But his life sentence is far from the end of Phung Ngo's activities and influence, even behind bars.
Whilst first incarcerated here at Long Bay Jail, Fung No somehow arranges a Chinese New Year party, catered for by an expensive Chinese restaurant, which is attended by several Fairfield councillors, as well as the prison's most notorious criminals. There's public outrage, and Fung No is transferred to the more secure Lithgow prison. In June 2003, prison authorities uncover evidence that Fung No is the mastermind behind a group called W2K, for willing to kill, and is planning an escape. The sternest of action is taken.
No has become, in our opinion and our assessment, very dangerous.
He is a covert operator who recruits other inmates to do his work for him.
We do have some specific information about an escape attempt.
As a result, Fung No is transferred to Australia's most secure prison, Goulburn Supermax, which houses the state's most dangerous prisoners, killers, rapists, and convicted terrorists. He's not allowed to mix with any other prisoner and spends all but 1 hour a day in his cell. This is Fung No's life until the day he dies, a far cry from the Vietnamese refugee who risked his life for Australian freedom, who built up wealth and power and then was ruthless and arrogant enough to do something never done here before, organise a political assassination. According to police, the case is now closed, and Fung No remains the only person to be convicted over John Newman's murder.
I see myself just like a prostitute. I don't care who I sleep with, as long as I achieve things for the community that I represent.